People think betrayal hits hardest when you're young, when you're naive enough to still believe love protects you. But that's a lie. Betrayal cuts deepest when you've lived long enough to think you're safe. I learned that at 70 years old, sitting in the sunroom of the house I built with my late husband, sipping tea brewed by the sun I thought would never hurt me. My name is Sarah Wilson. And this is the story of how I discovered that blood can turn to poison, and how I turned that poison back into power. It started quietly, as evil often does, not with shouting or chaos, but with a subtle shift in tone, a clipped answer here, a hollow smile there. My son Daniel and his wife Emily had been living with me for nearly a year after his business went under. I didn't mind. I have a $23 million estate. More than enough to support my only child while he got back on his feet. Or so I thought. The house felt different with them here. Emily filled it with her perfumes, her laughter. He had designer handbags. Her quiet complaints about how lonely it must be up here. She was polite, but never warm. I caught her once staring at my jewelry collection, pieces my husband had collected during 40 years of marriage, and her eyes weren't admiring. They were calculating. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. I'm old. I thought, I imagine things. But small things started happening that didn't feel like imagination. My prescriptions got rearranged. My tea tasted bitter some mornings. Metallic. Faintly off. When I asked about it, Emily smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I switched your brand. Mother, this one's herbal and better for your heart." My heart. How ironic. Still, I said nothing. I've lived long enough to know that suspicion without proof can make you sound mad, but the feeling grew. And one evening, after dinner, as the three of us sat by the fireplace, I caught Daniel watching me not with affection, not even concern, but with something else, something cold. It was the same look my husband used to give the courtroom before a difficult verdict. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept hearing Daniel's voice from earlier that week, Mom. Maybe it's time to think about simplifying things. That house is a lot to manage. You could sign over the trust to me, and I'll take care of everything. At the time, it sounded like concern. Now it sounded like preparation. The next morning, I called my lawyer, an old friend of my husband's, and asked him to quietly review my will. He found something disturbing. Someone had recently attempted to access my estate documents using my digital signature. Someone who wasn't me. That was the moment the truth began to take shape. When you've spent decades managing a family, you learn to play the fool when it suits you. So, I did. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I pretended to take the new tea. Emily made me every morning. But in reality, I poured it down the drain. I saved the cups. I started writing notes, dates, times, anything unusual. I even installed a small camera in the kitchen, tucked behind the spice rack, pretending it was a decorative sensor. What I saw 2 nights later made my hands go numb. Emily was at the counter with my tea tin open. She wasn't refilling it. She was emptying something into it from a small amber bottle. She glanced toward the hallway twice before screwing the lid shut, smiling to herself. The kind of smile that chills you to your bones. When I showed the footage to my lawyer, he said, "Sarah, we can go to the police right now." But I shook my head. Not yet. I told him, if they want to play a game, let's play it properly. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind whistle through the oak trees outside my window. I thought about Daniel as a boy, the way he used to fall asleep on my chest, the way he cried when his father died, the way I held his hand through every mistake he made. I had forgiven him everything: the failed business, the gambling debt, even the lies about where the money went. But this was something else. This was the murder of trust itself. Over the next week, I pretended nothing had changed. I even exaggerated my frailty, feigning dizziness, coughing weakly when they came into the room. "You should rest." "Mother," Emily said once, tucking a blanket around me with rehearsed tenderness. Daniel and I will handle everything soon. Everything. The word lingered. I decided then that I wouldn't simply survive. I would teach them. I would show them that the woman they thought was too weak to notice was far more dangerous than they could imagine. 2 days later, I called an old friend from church, a retired detective named Arthur. He owed me a favor. I told him everything, every detail, every suspicion, every bitter sip of tea. He listened quietly, then said, "Sarah, if you're right, we need evidence. Real evidence. Can you hold out a little longer? I've held out 70 years. I said, "What's a few more days?" So, I waited. And when Emily prepared my tea the next morning, I took a sip in front of her, smiling. But after she left, I poured the liquid into a small glass vial I'd bought online. Each day, I did the same. By the end of the week, I had 6 vials lined up like soldiers on my dresser, each one holding proof of her kindness. Arthur sent them to a private lab. The results came back the following Tuesday. Trace amounts of digitalis, a slow-acting cardiac toxin. In the right dose, it could mimic a natural heart attack. That was when my grief burned away, replaced by something colder. Purer resolve. I called Daniel into the study that evening. "You've always been my only son," I told him, keeping my tone calm. "If anything ever happens to me, I've decided to leave everything to you." He blinked, startled. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I'm just getting old," I said softly. "I want to make sure you and Emily are taken care of. Come by tomorrow afternoon, and we'll finalize everything over tea." He hesitated, then smiled a small, triumphant curve of his mouth that made my skin crawl. "That's very generous of you, Mom." When he left, I locked the door and exhaled. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anticipation. The game was about to end. The next day, I prepared the tea myself. I used her tin, her cups, her exact recipe, but with one small difference. The amber bottle she'd hidden behind the flower now held harmless vitamin drops. The bottle in my pocket held something far stronger, my own mixture. Courtesy of a sympathetic pharmacist who didn't ask questions when I told him it was for pest control. When Daniel and Emily arrived, all smiles and false warmth, I poured the tea with steady hands. They didn't hesitate to drink. They didn't even notice. I only pretended to sip mine. As we talked, I watched them closely, the way Emily's hand lingered on Daniel's comsle, the way he kept glancing toward the briefcase that held my estate documents. They thought it was already over. They thought I was theirs. But I had one last move. I excused myself and stepped out to the porch, pretending to take a call. When I returned, I brought with me 2 police officers and Arthur. "Mrs. Wilson," one of them said, "we received confirmation of your report. We have a warrant to search the premises." Emily froze mid-sip. Daniel's cup hit the saucer with a sharp crack. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," I said, my voice trembling, not from fear but from satisfaction, "is the end of pretending." Emily's face went pale first. Daniel's followed a second later. Like the color draining out of 2 paintings at once, the officers stepped past me into the kitchen, their boots clicking against the marble. They opened drawers, cabinets, the spice rack. When they reached the amber bottle, one of them lifted it delicately with gloved hands. "This it?" he asked. Arthur nodded. "That's the one. Check for residues." Daniel stood there frozen, half between outrage and disbelief. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" "What's going on?" I said softly. "Is that I finally stopped mistaking my love for blindness." He blinked. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the poison," I whispered. "The digitalis, the false signatures, the will you tried to forge." For a moment, he looked almost human again, shocked, scared. like the little boy who once ran to me after scraping his knee. But that child was gone. What stood before me was a man who'd traded every bit of innocence for greed. Mom, I would never. Don't. I interrupted. Not another lie. I have video footage. Lab reports. Witness statements. Arthur's been documenting everything for weeks. The officers carried out a tray of evidence cups. Bottles. The tampered tea tin. Emily's hands started to shake. This isn't what it looks like. She stammered. I didn't, Daniel. Tell her. He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. Jaw clenched. That silence was louder than any confession. When they escorted them out of the house, Emily began sobbing. Daniel didn't even look back at me. I watched from the porch as the police car disappeared down the long gravel drive, its red and blue lights fading into the trees. Then the quiet returned thick. Absolute. Heavy enough to break me. Arthur stayed behind, gently touching my arm. You did the right thing. Sarah. I nodded, but the words felt hollow. I'd exposed them. Yes, I'd saved myself, but the cost was something no court could measure. I'd lost my son, the last living piece of the man I once loved. That night, I sat alone in the study, staring at the half-empty teacup they'd left behind. The faint lipstick mark on the rim, the smell of sugar and something metallic beneath. I thought about the years I'd spent protecting Daniel from the world, only to realize I should have been protecting the world from him. He'd been a good boy once. Thoughtful. Curious. He used to collect leaves for me in autumn, pressing them between book pages so they'd stay bright forever. I still have one of them fragile. Gold-edged. Kept inside my Bible. I took it out that night and stared at it for a long time, wondering if some part of him was still hidden in there, pressed between the layers of who he used to be. The next morning, the house was too quiet. I wandered through each room, touching the walls, the furniture, the life I'd built and almost lost. The sunlight poured through the tall windows, warm and clean, and for a moment I felt almost weightless. But peace after war is strange. It doesn't come as joy, it comes as exhaustion. Every sound felt sharp, every silence suspicious. I caught myself checking the locks twice, testing the smell of my tea before drinking it. Betrayal rewires you. You never really go back to who you were. 2 days later, Arthur came by again. They've been charged. He told me. Attempted homicide. Fraude. Conspiracy. The lab confirmed the poison. The DA's office is moving fast. I nodded, staring at the photo on the mantel. Me, Daniel, and my husband. Taken years ago on this same porch. My husband's hand rested on Daniel's shoulder. Proud. Protective. The boy in the photo had his father's smile. I wondered what he'd think if he could see us now. I'll testify, I said finally. Arthur looked surprised. You don't have to. We already have enough evidence. I know, I said, but I need to look him in the eye. One last time. When the trial began 3 weeks later, the courtroom was cold. Bright. Sterile. Daniel sat at the defense table, clean-shaven, wearing the same navy suit he'd worn to his father's funeral. Emily sat beside him, pale and defiant. She avoided my gaze. When it was my turn to take the stand, the prosecutor asked me to explain everything. I told it simply, calmly, like reciting a sad bedtime story. I told them about the tea, the bitterness, the camera, the bottle. I told them about the night I decided to stop being afraid. Then he asked, Mrs. Wilson, what made you decide to confront your son rather than go straight to the authorities? He hesitated, feeling the courtroom blur around me. Because, I said quietly, I needed him to see who I really was. Not the old woman he thought was dying. Not the mother who'd forgive anything. I needed him to see the cost of his own choices. Daniel didn't move. His eyes flicked up once, Just once. Meeting mine. For a second, I saw something flicker there, regret. Maybe. Or shame, but then it was gone. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, I didn't cry. I thought I would. But instead, I just felt still. Like the ocean after a storm. Calm but endless. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse and stood on the steps. The city humming around me. People passed by, carrying on with their lives, unaware that mine had just ended and begun at the same time. The reporters called it a high society scandal. They wrote headlines about greed, inheritance, betrayal, but none of them captured what it really was. A mother learning that love doesn't always redeem, it sometimes destroys. Weeks turned into months. The house grew quieter still. Some nights, I swore I could hear echoes Daniel's laugh down the hallway, Emily's heels clicking on the tile. But when I turned, there was only emptiness. One evening, as I was locking up, I noticed something on the porch step. A small envelope. No stamp. No, return address. Inside was a folded note in Daniel's handwriting. Mom. It read, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this. I just wanted you to know that I never meant for it to go that far. It was supposed to be a bluff, Emily's idea. Not mine. But I let it happen. I let everything happen. You were right. I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a balance sheet. I'm sorry. There was no signature. Just a single pressed leaf tucked inside gold-edged. Fragile. I stood there on the porch, the night wind rustling the trees, and felt the tears finally come. Quietly. Slowly. The kind that don't cleanse, only remind. I didn't visit him in prison. I couldn't. But I kept the note in my desk drawer, beside the old one from my husband that said, Take care of our boy. Maybe that's all I can do now. Take care of him from afar. By making sure he never gets another chance to hurt anyone else. People ask me if I regret what I did. I don't. I only regret that it had to be done at all. Justice, I've learned, isn't clean. It's messy, complicated, and lonely. It doesn't heal the wound, it just stops the bleeding. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, not the bitter kind. Just plain chamomile, and I think about the way the poison nearly stole everything from me. And I think about the strange truth of it all. The poison was never in the cup. It was in their hands. Their hearts. Their choices. And mine was the antidote. For the next few days, I barely left the house. The letter stayed on the kitchen table, its edges curling from the damp air, as if it had been breathing along with me, exhaling secrets it had held for decades. Every time I passed by, I'd catch myself staring at it again, reading the same words over and over, until they stopped looking like English and turned into shapes, just black ink pressed into paper. It wasn't the shock of Daniel not being mine that hurt the most. It was the realization that my entire life, my marriage, my motherhood, my sacrifices had been built on someone else's choices. Choices made without me. About me. Thomas had always been a quiet man. A builder. Not a talker. He'd spent his life fixing things. Cabinets. Fences. Leaky faucets, as if maintaining order could keep chaos away. Maybe that's why he thought he could fix a broken past by hiding it. But secrets don't heal. They ferment. And one day, they explode. That morning, I took out an old shoebox from the top shelf of my closet, the one where I'd kept Thomas's things after he died. Inside were old photographs, receipts, a faded birthday card, and something else I hadn't touched in years, his leather-bound journal. I sat down, the journal heavy in my lap, and opened to the first page. His handwriting was neat, meticulous, dated years before Daniel's birth. I skimmed until a single line caught my eye. If she ever finds out, she'll never forgive me. I froze. The next entry mentioned a woman's name. Evelyn. No last name. Just Evelyn. He wrote about her like someone haunted about a woman he'd known before me, who disappeared suddenly, leaving behind a child she couldn't keep. I turned the page and saw a photograph tucked inside. A baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. The back of the photo read, Daniel, 3 days old. My hands shook so hard, I nearly dropped it. So it was true. I wasn't just the woman who raised him. I was the woman who replaced her. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I pressed the photo to my chest. Not out of affection, but desperation, like it was proof that I'd been part of his story, even if biology said otherwise. Then, slowly, the tremor in my hands turned to stillness. I put the journal down and looked around my living room. Every inch of this house, every memory, every mark on the wall existed because I had held it together. I had built this family out of ashes. And now, both of them, Thomas and Daniel, had erased me like a smudge on glass. But I wasn't going to fade quietly. I spent the rest of the day in motion, sorting, cleaning, opening boxes I hadn't touched in years. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remind myself what was mine. Old photographs went into one pile, wedding mementos into another. The things that were his Thomas's tools, his fishing gear. The old watch he loved I packed into a small box. Later that night, I drove to the river and tossed the whole thing in. When it sank, I didn't cry. I just stood there and listened to the water. By the time I got home, I knew what I was going to do next. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Revenge is too small, too temporary. What I wanted was something quieter, something that would live in Daniel's conscience long after the anger had faded. I began writing again. This time, not in that document labeled proof. I opened a new one and titled it Inheritance. In it, I started writing my will. Every detail of it was deliberate. The house, the savings, the heirlooms, everything I'd built with my hands and tears. But instead of leaving it to Daniel, I decided something different. I called the local community foundation the next day and asked about creating a scholarship. For what field, the woman on the phone asked kindly. For single mothers. I said, specifically, those who were left behind and had to start again. I could hear her smile through the phone. That's beautiful. Mrs. Langley. Do you want it in your family's name? I paused, then said, no, just mine. When I hung up, a strange calm settled over me, not peace exactly, but purpose. That night, I cooked for the first time in weeks. A full meal roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, wine. I set 2 plates, one for myself and one for Thomas's empty chair, not because I missed him, but because I needed to say goodbye properly. I poured him a glass of wine and whispered, you had your secrets, Thomas, but I have mine now too. The next morning, Daniel called. Mom, he said, sounding uncertain. I've been thinking about what you told me. About Dad. Yes. I talked to Claire about it. She thinks you might be mistaken. That maybe you're just confused. The word confused made me laugh. A quiet, humorless sound. You really think I'd lie about something like this? He hesitated. I don't know. You've been different. I am different, I said. I finally stopped waiting for permission to exist. Mom, please. No, I said firmly. You had your chance to talk to me like a son. You chose silence instead. He sighed, frustrated. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. That's the point. After we hung up, I went outside. The sky was low and gray, the kind of day that feels suspended between seasons. My garden had overgrown weeds twisting around the old birdbath, roses blooming wild. I knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds one by one, the earth cold beneath my fingers. It struck me then, grief is like gardening. You can cut away the dead things, but the roots stay. They'll try to grow back, unless you dig deep enough to tear them out. By late afternoon, I'd cleared half the yard. I was filthy, exhausted, but alive. Really alive. And then, as I was packing up the tools, I saw a car pulling into the driveway. Daniel's car. He got out slowly, holding a folder in his hands. His face looked different, tired, maybe older than I remembered. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. I turned back to the soil, brushing my palms on my jeans. "Mom, please," he said. "I need to show you something." He held out the folder. Inside were printed papers' DNA results. "I took a test," he said softly. "You were right." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I needed proof, but because for once, he'd faced the truth instead of hiding from it. He swallowed hard. "But I don't care what it says. You're my mother. You always will be." I looked at him for a long time, at the man who had been both my pride and my undoing. His voice cracked when he said, "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It never would be. But it was a start." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." He exhaled, relieved. "So, can we fix this?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. Some things don't need fixing, Daniel. They need accepting. He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I forgive you," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean going backward. It means I'm moving forward without resentment, but also without pretending." He nodded silently. "I understand." When he left, I watched his car disappear down the road. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to chase after him. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat in that same old chair, the one that had witnessed everything: love, betrayal, truth. And I smiled, because finally, after 60 years of being everyone else's something, a wife, a mother, a shadow, I had become someone to myself. He's right. I did. Sometimes I think about how strange it is that survival can look so quiet. There's no grand applause. No cinematic finale where the music swells and the camera fades out. There's just breath, the sound of your own lungs doing their work. The steady rhythm. That means you're still here. Still moving forward. I used to imagine healing as a bright moment. Something that would crash over me like sunlight after a storm. But in truth, it arrived like dawn, slow, pâle, hesitant, inching across the floorboards of my life, until one day I realized it wasn't dark anymore. It's been 5 years since that night, the night of the tea. The police. The end. Sometimes I call it the unraveling. Because that's what it felt like, a tapestry of decades, suddenly coming apart thread by thread, leaving me staring at the raw fabric underneath. And yet, what I discovered was not emptiness. It was truth. Painful, unflinching truth. But still truth, and that has a beauty of its own. Daniel is out on parole now. The judge released him on the condition of full restitution and ongoing therapy. The day I heard the news, I didn't cry. I didn't rejoice either. I simply sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea. The same kind I drink every evening now. And whispered into the wind, "Be better." 2 weeks later, I received a letter from him. "Mom, I'm working at a halfway house now, helping men coming out of prison find jobs. I don't know if this redeems anything, but I'm trying to make use of what I've done to turn the shame into something that helps instead of harms. I think of you often. I still don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you know I'll spend the rest of my life earning the chance to deserve it. It wasn't redemption. It was something smaller, humility. But that was enough. Sometimes, that's all we can ask for." I wrote back once. Just once. "You're still my son. I hope you find peace. But don't chase forgiveness like a finish line. Live as if you already have it. Let that guide you." He never replied again. And I didn't need him to. Our silence has become a language of its own, not cold, not broken, just finished. People ask me, sometimes, if I'm lonely. I tell them no. Loneliness is the absence of connection. But I am deeply connected to the sea outside my window, to the garden that blooms in defiance of the years, to the quiet hum of this old house that has carried every version of me. There's a comfort in growing old. If you learn how to listen to it. My body is slower now. Yes. But my mind has never been sharper. I spend my mornings painting at the kitchen table. Not for art, but for memory. I paint things that matter only to me, the blue teacups that once held my near death. The porch where I took my first breath of freedom. The golden leaf that Daniel sent from prison. I paint them not as they were, but as they feel luminous, suspended, touched by the strange grace of survival. Sometimes I catch myself laughing, not the kind of laughter that hides pain, but the light, unguarded kind that bubbles up without permission. I think that's how you know you've healed, when laughter comes without needing to explain it to anyone. Arthur still visits every few months. His hair's gone grayer, his hands more unsteady, but his eyes are kind as ever. We sit on the porch and drink tea in silence. Occasionally he'll say, "You ever think about selling this place?" and I'll smile. No. I tell him, this house isn't a memory, it's a witness. He never argues. A few years ago, I started mentoring young women at the community center, mostly single mothers or daughters estranged from their families. They come to me with their stories, their tears, their guilt, and I listen. Sometimes I tell them mine, not the details, not the scandal the papers printed, but the truth that matters. That forgiveness doesn't mean returning what someone stole. It means refusing to let them keep it. I see the way their eyes widen, the way their shoulders ease. It's strange, isn't it? How pain, when shared with gentleness, becomes something else, something almost holy. There's a young girl named Lily I've grown particularly fond of. She's 23, the same age Emily was when she married Daniel. Lily's had a rough start, absent parents. A child of her own. Dreams too heavy to carry. One day she asked me, "Do you ever wish you could go back, change the story?" I looked at her for a long moment and said, "No, if I hadn't lived through it. I wouldn't have learned what mercy feels like when it's finally your own. Because that's what time does. It turns wounds into wisdom. It doesn't erase the pain, but it reframes. It teaches you to look at the broken glass and see how it catches the light." The other night, I dreamt of my husband. It had been years since he'd visited me that way. He was standing in the garden, sunlight on his face, smiling the way he used to before sickness took him. He said nothing, just reached out and handed me a cup of tea. When I woke, I was crying not from sadness, but from the warmth that lingered. It felt like closure, like permission to stop guarding the past so fiercely. The seasons turn differently now. I notice things I used to rush past, the way morning light pools on the kitchen counter, the sound of rain tapping against the windows, the quiet comfort of knowing I don't have to be anyone's mother, wife, or caretaker anymore. I'm simply Sarah, a woman who lived, a woman who endured, a woman who chose truth over illusion. There's a framed photograph on my bedside table now. It's not of Daniel, not of my husband, not even of me. It's of the ocean. Taken the morning I left Maine. The waves were calm, the horizon wide. I keep it there as a reminder that life, no matter how violent its storms, always finds its rhythm again. And that's what this story really is. Not about revenge, not about punishment, but about rhythm, about how we break and rebuild, about how truth burns but also purifies, about how love, even when betrayed, leaves something behind: strength. If you're listening to this and carrying your own wound, your own betrayal, I want you to hear me clearly. You can survive it. You can survive them. You can rebuild the ruins they left, even if the world tells you you're too old, too broken, too late. The truth hurts, but it also frees you. Let it wash over you like the tide. Because one day, when you least expect it, you'll wake up and realize you're no longer living in the moment you were broken. You're living in the one you rebuilt. And when that happens, don't look back for too long. Just pour yourself a cup of tea, step into the sunlight, and breathe. You've earned it. If my story reached you tonight, if it made you remember your own strength, or reminded you that endings can also be beginnings, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your voice matters here. Tell me in the comments what truth changed your life. Because sometimes, the stories that break us are the very ones that teach us how to live again.